Hey there, everyone. My name is Bernadette Smith, and I'm a keynote speaker and writer. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to Five Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I still bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I've found is that there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these actions and policies to help you build a more inclusive world. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Jenny Chen, she, her, CEO and founder of Catalais Consulting. Welcome to the show, Jenny. I am so thrilled to have you. This week, we're talking about Harvard opening its wallet, a trans trailblazer owning the soccer pitch, women literally building the future, and more. Jenny, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And can I just say, we obviously have the same great taste in hairstyles. So, really excited to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you tell folks a little bit about yourself? You have a really interesting professional background.
Yeah, for sure. So, hi everyone. I'm Jenny Chen. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the founder of Catalais Consulting. I'm often called, you'll see online, a DEI leader, but like many women, especially women of color, that title was really given to me based on lived experiences, not something I ever think I really pursued. But at my core, I'm a business strategist and I help organizations accelerate growth by integrating inclusive and equitable practices into their core operations, not as a side initiative led by HR, but really as a business imperative, right? That drives innovation, retention, long term success. I'm a mom of two girls, almost 18 and 11, and a bonus mom to a son and daughter. I'm a dog mom to a golden doodle named Eugene. And I think my superpower is being a lifelong connector of people who believes in the power of story, curiosity, and showing up unapologetically as our full authentic self.
I love so much of what you said. My dog sometimes visits my, not sometimes the show, but sometimes my clients. So I'm a proud dog mom as well. And, I think the curiosity piece is so important. So thank
Mhm.
you so much for joining today. And can you tell folks a little bit about, how you kind of, I know you sort of said, you were sort of thrust into it in a way, and can you tell folks a little bit about how it ended up that you started to focus more on the business side of things?
Yeah, for sure. So, for the majority of my career in finance, I was a top ranking investment sales
Mm,
professional. And I was noticing later on that I was often the only at the table, sometimes the only woman, and a lot of the time the only visible minority. And so I was tapped on the shoulder, actually, based on my lived in experiences to help break down some of the systemic legacy barriers that we have in our industry,
mm,
particularly in my organization. And when I got there, I learned that a lot of the challenges we were seeing, Bernadette, were not necessarily diversity problems. We put a diversity lens on it, we labeled it a diversity issue. But
mm-hmm.
ultimately, number one, usually it was a lack of respect, like grounded in human compassion, kindness, respect is something that we needed more of. And also, two, they were oftentimes like business infrastructure problems, right?
Yeah.
Talent management problems, recruitment problems. Instead of putting a diversity lens off on it, I was often taking it off to solve for a bigger issue.
There you go. I love that perspective. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And so you're in Canada, right?
I'm
And
in Canada.
here in the US, we are just seeing so much hate for DEI, lots of clickbait headlines, lots of regression. How are things up there? Can you give us a little bit of perspective from our neighbors to the north?
So I think it's always a very interesting conversation because I cover North American wealth management, and I often had a lot of conversations with my colleagues in the US. I feel that in Canada, we're not there yet, but we're getting there to a point where our moral values are deeply tied to our political values, right?
Mm,
Which makes things incredibly polarizing. Like you cannot be conservative in the US and also care about gender or racial equality. That's not heard of. But these things are not mutually exclusive. And I think Canada, we are in a much more accepting and also free country when it comes to being able to choose like who we are, how we show up, who we vote for. And
hmm.
I'm fairly proud of that.
I love that. Hashtag jealous. Okay. All right. So, in this week's Five Things newsletter, I wrote a little bit about experimentation. Some people have known that I've been taking a stand up comedy class for women. I just retook the class. Our graduation show was Saturday. And in trying to get ready, I visited some other open mics just to sort of like test out my work, right? Open mics are kind of awkward spaces. A lot of times the audience is primarily other comics or can be very much hit or miss. Folks are absolutely experimenting and there's a lot of failure. There's a lot of bombs. And that's actually kind of the cool thing about it because it's sort of accepted that that's just how it is, right? And so that makes it safe and people keep showing up anyway. And so it just made me think about how important it is to kind of have a space in our lives for whatever it is we're working on to experiment and to have that room to fail so we can grow and take those lessons.
I love that. And as I told you, I think that I'm the funniest person I know, and I laugh at all my own jokes. And so I might take a page from your book and start taking stand up over my classes too, Bernadette.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun and great people. Do you have any place that you sort of experiment with testing out things that you're working on in your life?
Yeah, for sure. I think having a podcast, starting one myself called "Tune Up Your Warrior." I think that's a really great place to have conversations, test out different thought leadership, hear from different
Yeah.
perspectives from people that don't necessarily think like you, right? And then just like your open mic sessions, I mean, you're a lot of times you're only as good as your last event or
Mhm.
podcast or stand up, and in these types of spaces that we've created we can always evolve, improve, right? Even we might even think
Mhm.
differently 4 or 5 episodes later, so I think it's great.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea and I can't wait to check it out when you launch. Okay, so let's move into this week's good vibes. The first story this week comes from Harvard University, which has eliminated tuition for families earning under 200,000 US a year, which is ensuring that students from lower and middle income backgrounds can afford the school. Families under 100,000 will have all costs including housing and food covered. So great news out of Harvard, and yet remember that a lot of those families with lower incomes have kids who can't get into Harvard. So,
Right.
bigger problem. But
Yeah, and I think, like you said, that's a great first step. I think financial barriers to education is something that we have long needed to eliminate. But like you said, most students don't go to Harvard, right?
right.
And public universities, where a majority of folks attend, are still underfunded.
Yeah.
Tuition is rising, access remains unequal. I didn't grow up with generational wealth or in legacy networks. And so I know exactly what it's like to navigate systems that weren't really built for us.
Yeah.
And I mentioned I have a 17-year-old daughter. She's going to university in the fall in biomedical engineering. And even with our background in finance, I found the process of applying for grants, bursaries, scholarships like
Yeah.
super overwhelming, super confusing. And a university tour guide actually told us that they once granted the Women in STEM bursary to a male student because no women applied. And so that could be said that there weren't enough women in STEM, but it's also a sign that these opportunities aren't often communicated outside of the same circles that already know about
Mhm.
them, right? And I think in Canada, just like the US, Bernadette, we have so many second and third generation immigrant families whose parents, grandparents didn't attend post secondary school here. And so if you don't already know where to look or how to look, you're often left out no matter how deserving you are, right? So it's a good first step, I think, but ultimately I think it's about making every learning environment more accessible, visible, and sustainable for everyone.
No, I agree. There's a lot of systemic barriers for sure. Well, hopefully this will help somewhat. All right, the second story this week comes from world of soccer, the world of football, where a trans referee has debuted. Sapir Berman is the first trans woman to officiate an international soccer match, proving that trans rights belong in sports. So she's Israeli. Has full backing of Israeli's Football Association, and she's breaking barriers in a sport that's still trying to get this right, in an industry that's still trying to get this right. Trans folks are excluded a lot as athletes, and it's nice to see some representation as a referee.
I think that my only reference and knowledge to date about soccer is watching Ted Lasso. And so, but I will just say that this is such a powerful example of visibility, seeing a trans woman officiate at this level with the full support of governing body. I think that's huge. And it just reminds me that progress in representation is layered, right? And it's not just about showing up, it's about really belonging and asking hard questions about who gets to be there, who feels safe, and who's supported when they get there. And I try and center a lot of the work that I do around, the core idea of, are we creating spaces that reflect the reality of today's world? Or are we still operating from systems that were built without any of us in mind? And that includes trans athletes. So it's a great story for sure.
I love that question because it opens up so many sub questions, right? And so many opportunities to make real systemic change.
Yeah.
Okay, and this next story sort of ties into that. The third story this week comes from the city of Indianapolis, Indiana, USA, where women are building more than just skylines. So, as Indianapolis is are building its fourth tallest building, which is a massive convention center and hotel, women are actually very heavily involved, not only in the physical aspect, but also running the logistics, managing contracts, and leading companies. And this is part of a major urban development initiative. The industry itself is only 10% women. So, pretty significant deal here. Enough that it made the news, I think, is notable.
Yeah, I love this story because I think it reflects something that we often forget, that women have always been capable and we've always been ready, and we were just excluded from the blueprint.
Yes.
If you think about how many women's leadership development programs are out there, that is basically saying we're coming from a place where women are inherently not ready to compete, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this isn't just, women laying tile, this is women managing logistics, overseeing contracts, really running the show. And
Yep.
so it's showing this isn't performative diversity in construction, it's real leadership in real infrastructure. And as someone who grew up in a male dominated industry, I know what it's like to be underestimated and what happens when we stop asking for permission and really start owning the space.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that is so well said. So well said. All right, well, let's move into the fourth story this week, which is also about soccer. Sorry, Jenny. um,
Okay.
For decades, women's soccer has been treated like a men's game with different players, but emerging research has proven that menstrual cycles can impact training, performance, and injury risk. So, elite teams like the Chelsea Football Club women, Manchester City women, Arsenal, number of elite teams are taking this data driven approach by syncing training with player cycles to better impact their performance. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and I particularly loved this one because I think it speaks to the power of data and the danger of defaulting to systems that were built around male physiology,
Yes.
right? And for decades, like women were excluded from medical research entirely, and everything we know about heart attacks is still based on male symptoms, right? We've only recently
Mhm.
learned that women experience different signs like jaw pain or nausea. Crash test dummies used to be modeled exclusively on male bodies, so they never
Right.
took into consideration pregnant women. And
Mhm.
so now we're finally seeing some of the realization in sports science. I can't help but chuckle because it's 2025, but realistically, like, when did we ever call that out? But I think that it's not enough, Bernadette, to include women as a single category. I recently came across a women's health event here in Ottawa, Canada, and it's meant to advance healthcare for women across the country. And yet, not a single woman of color was featured, right? Like, how can
Ah,
we truly advance women's health if we aren't including the diverse of needs of indigenous, black, east asian,
mhm.
south asian, and other racialized women? Like,
Wow.
example, we Chinese women like me have higher risks of hypertension and Alzheimer's due to sodium heavy diets and exposure to cooking oils linked to lung cancer. And so if we're not part of the research or the conversation, then
Mm.
we're not going to be part of the solution.
Mm. Gave me chills. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it is insidious.
Yeah,
All of the little places, right? All of the little systems that have not been built for us. And
yeah,
bit by bit, they need to be dismantled or updated.
for sure.
So, yeah, it's insidious. All right. Well, the last story that, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
Nope.
Okay. The last story this week is about music. So, a group of talented young musicians of color, they won a competition to perform with the U.S. Marine Band until an executive order against diversity programs here in the U.S. abruptly canceled the event. So, this was an example of erasure of equity initiatives, but former military band members showed up. They veterans from every branch joined these young musicians for an impromptu concert, proving that real patriotism values inclusion. So you can see it on 60 Minutes.
Yeah, you said I gave you chills. Well, this story gave me goosebumps because it
Yeah.
reminds me that even when systems try to silence people, real leadership steps up, but also how easy it is to silence equity work, not just politically, but even in the workspace, right? And how fragile that is. And I talk about it all the time that, I'm kind of tired of the word allies, Bernadette, because
Yeah.
you can be an ally and still know something's wrong and not do anything about it. What we really need now is more advocacy, more actionable partners, right? Strong partnership, collaboration. So I actually came up with we need more warriors, not less, in
Mm.
order to champion a lot of this work forward.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And the cool thing is everyone can be a warrior.
Yeah.
You can be a warrior and you can be like everyone can, right? It's a call to action.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, let's move into this week's good vibes to go. So, I'll share a good vibe to go and then I'll invite you to share your own. So, my good vibe to go is the full concert performance of the Equity Arc Wind Symphony. It's over on 60 Minutes. It's an amazing performance. I listened to it while I was writing the newsletter, and I'll include that in the show notes, the YouTube link. All right, Jenny, what's your good vibe to go?
So I thought long and hard about what my good vibe to go is. I spent a lot of my life being told to tone down my warrior, which is the voice I think that I created to stand up for myself, but also other people. And I realized you don't need to be an expert to create change. You just need to be a kind human who notices. And equity work isn't just for DEI practitioners. It's not just a strategy or an initiative. It's a lens, the way to see the world with clarity and accountability. And I think that when we notice gaps, the next question is, what's going on? Who's missing from our table? What am I willing to do to change it? Because systems don't shift on their own, right? They shift
Yeah.
when we decide to stop playing small, start leading with intention. And like I said, the world doesn't need less warrior, it needs more.
Yes. Love it. Love it. Well, we'll make sure your words of wisdom get in the show notes. All right, folks, if you don't already get the Five Things newsletter, you can subscribe at fivethingsdei.com. And Jenny, how can folks get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can check me out on LinkedIn. I'm also on the internet, so catalyst.com. You can also follow me on Instagram, catalyst.consulting, Catalais. And I update it quite regularly, so I hope you join me there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jenny. You have been a great guest, and I hope you have a great week. And everyone watching, have a great week. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.